Supreme Court debate. Politicians wrestle over the seat left vacant by the death of Justice Antonin Scalia. Foreign spies. Hackers target U.S. presidential candidates. Pope Francis's plea for the poor. How God's mercy for us is connected with our mercy for others. And we go one-on-one with Chris Smith. The congressman describes the importance of the newly approved Religious Freedom Bill. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, May 18th, 2016. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Donald Trump unveils a list of 11 potential Supreme Court nominees. If elected president, he says he'll nominate one of them to fill the seat of the late Antonin Scalia. The 8 men and 3 women are conservative federal and state judges. One is a former law clerk to Justice Scalia. There's also a Texas Supreme Court justice with a reputation as a very strong conservative. In a statement, Trump says the list is representative of the kind of constitutional principles I value. The Judicial Crisis Network's Carrie Severino, a frequent guest on EWTN News Nightly, comments, the names on this list would need to be vetted, obviously, but they all seem to share in common a record of putting the law and the Constitution ahead of their political preferences. Meanwhile, Senate Republicans are not budging in their refusal to hold hearings for President Obama's nominee. 2 months after his nomination, Chief Judge Merrick Garland met today with frustrated Democratic senators. Wyatt Goolsby reports from Capitol Hill tonight.
Brian, Democrats here in the Senate have their hands tied. They like Merrick Garland, but they don't hold the majority, so they can't call for a hearing. This week, though, they're keeping Garland in the spotlight.
It's been a busy day on Capitol Hill for Merrick Garland. The D.C. Appellate Court Chief Justice is meeting with Democrats who hope to keep him relevant in the public eye.
Wisdom and insight and eloquence on this panel.
They're also holding forums painting Garland in a positive light. Former government officials and lawyers who know Garland are making their case as to why he's qualified for the high court.
He certainly has all of the qualifications that one is looking for in terms of competence, experience, background, and balance.
But all their effort may be for naught. Republicans say they want to wait until the next president is elected to consider the late Justice Antonin Scalia's vacant seat. And whether it's Garland or anyone else Obama appoints, the GOP majority vows not to take up the nomination this year.
It is frustrating. It'd be frustrating no matter who it was, but when you have somebody as superb as Merrick Garland, it's very frustrating.
The part of this that was so important, I thought, was the minimization of the Supreme Court. That the Supreme Court, for over a year, will not be able to act on any really controversial case.
Both Democrats and Republicans see the appointment of the next Supreme Court justice as a critical one. The court has, for the most part, remained ideologically divided, 4-4. From immigration to marriage to abortion, the next Supreme Court justice will likely weigh in on a number of key issues during his or her time on the court.
Several pro-life groups are happy Republican senators are not holding a hearing for Garland. They say that anyone Obama appoints will uphold abortion on demand and the redefinition of marriage. Brian?
Thank you, Wyatt Goolsby on Capitol Hill. Now, other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Hillary Clinton claims victory over Bernie Sanders in the Kentucky Democratic primary, but the actual numbers are still too close to call. Chief White House correspondent and political director Lauren Ashburn has more.
Brian, Democratic presidential candidates divided the spoils last night. Hillary Clinton won a razor-thin victory in Kentucky, while Bernie Sanders won by a more sizable margin in Oregon. Sanders was speaking at a rally when his wife came out to tell him about his victory.
My wife just tells me that CNN has called Oregon for Bernie Sanders.
He also had a message for those telling him to drop out.
We are in to the last ballot is cast.
Delegates in both contests are awarded proportionally, so Sanders' victory won't slow Clinton's march to the Democratic presidential nomination. Despite the uncertainty, the primary contest is already making history, as former South Carolina State House member Bakari Sellers explains.
Hillary Clinton got that much closer tonight to being the first female nominee of a major party in this country, and that is a huge milestone.
The next chance for Clinton and Sanders to gather their delegates takes place the first weekend in June. when the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico hold their caucuses. Meanwhile, Secretary Clinton is less than 100 delegates shy of securing the Democratic nomination. The Associated Press says she has 2,291 of the 2,383 delegates she needs. Sanders trails with 1,528 delegates. Trump is also less than 100 delegates shy of securing the Republican nomination. He has 1,160 of the 1,237 delegates he needs. Ted Cruz and John Kasich also picked up delegates yesterday, even though they suspended their campaigns. Trump continues to reach out to prominent Republicans. He was reportedly meeting with former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger this morning. Trump is also teaming up with the Republican National Committee to help with fundraising. This could enable donors to contribute more than the $2,700 limit for individual candidates. Governor Chris Christie is helping Trump with his campaign, but 72% of people in New Jersey hope Trump doesn't pick him as his running mate. The Quinnipiac University poll says 64% of Republican voters don't think Christie should be vice president. Brian, only 29% of New Jersey voters approve of Christie, and that marks his lowest approval rating yet.
Thank you, Lauren Ashburn at the White House. And the head of U.S. intelligence says foreign hackers are spying on American presidential candidates. Director of National Intelligence James Clapper says the government is working with the campaigns trying to tighten security. Foreign hacking has also been a problem in the past 2 U.S. presidential elections. Clapper spoke today at the Bipartisan Policy Center here in Washington. He says cyber threats from closed societies such as North Korea are very difficult to detect.
And our task as in the intelligence community is to find those bad actors and to distinguish the terrorists sending directions on how to build a bomb or how to defeat TSA search procedures from someone sending their grandkid a recipe for apple pie.
Clapper says hackers often gain access to computer systems just by pretending to be someone else and asking people to open an attachment or click on a link. The Obama administration extends overtime rules for millions of workers. Starting December 1st, employers must pay overtime to workers making a salary less than $47,476. That's double the old amount, meaning about 4 million more workers will now be eligible for overtime pay. Some employers criticize this move, calling it drastic. Governor Nikki Haley is expected to sign a South Carolina bill banning abortions after 19 weeks of pregnancy. South Carolina is the 17th state to pass this type of restriction. Similar laws are in effect in 12 states. Others have been blocked by court challenges or have yet to take effect. Holly Gatling, Executive Director of South Carolina Citizens for Life, is joining us by Skype. Holly, what's your reaction to the passage of this bill?
We are delighted. We are thrilled. We are grateful.
Do you expect Governor Nikki Haley to sign it? I know she says she wants a little more time to review it.
The governor said she would sign it, and she has signed all the pro-life bills that we passed during her administration, and yes, we do expect her to sign it.
What is the pro-life climate in South Carolina overall? Will most citizens support this?
Yes, we actually did a poll, and the overall support for protecting unborn children capable of feeling pain was right at about 60% across the board.
That's very positive. Do you think this legislation can survive a legal challenge given the current climate of the federal court system?
Yes, we do. It has to do with the state's compelling interest in protecting the life of unborn children, and the court has upheld a state's compelling interest to pass this kind of legislation.
There are now about 17 states that have passed this sort of legislation, and we noted this morning that many of those states are led by women, such as you, Nikki Haley, Governor Nikki Haley there in South Carolina. Do you see women leading this campaign for life around the country, at the state level especially?
Absolutely, Brian. Two of our strongest pro-life leaders in the South Carolina House of Representatives are women. Representative Wendy Nanny, who was the chief sponsor of this bill, and Representative Donna Hicks, who is the chief sponsor of the next bill that we hope to pass, which will ban dismemberment abortions.
Well, Holly Gatling from South Carolina Citizens for Life, thanks for joining us by Skype. We appreciate you giving us an update. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
And Louisiana Right to Life says state senators have approved a bill banning dismemberment abortions. That barbaric procedure involves babies being torn apart limb by limb. That bill now goes to the Louisiana governor. Mississippi defies an Obama administration letter telling public schools how they should handle transgender students. State education officials said Friday they would follow the guidance, but State School Superintendent Carrie Wright just reversed that decision. Texas also objected to the federal policy of allowing transgender students to use the bathroom or locker room of their choice. Star Parker is founder and president of CURE, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. So Attorney General Loretta Lynch likens this crisis, as they call it, to the civil rights movement. Do you agree with that comparison?
Of course not. It seems the left, the progressive left, always tries to use this language from the Civil Rights Act so that they can divide to conquer. If they can call people bigoted or racist and or discriminatory, then it shuts down dialogue. When you think about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., there was not one eternal truth that he tried to overturn. And in fact, he appealed to biblical truths to make his case that America needed to move toward her constitutional founding principles.
In this comparison, doesn't that minimize some of the suffering that African Americans went through under the Jim Crow laws in the South?
Well, it confuses in particular our youth because it not only does it minimize, it diverts attention away from that suffering, but at the same time they indoctrinate our young people that it's the same struggle. It's a struggle of social justice, and that's why they now buy into this idea, our youth, of LGBT, because they, and Q, don't forget the Q, because that's coming new. But this is why that many of them buy into this idea, is because of this confused message that it's the same suffering that African Americans went through after slavery to go through Jim Crow South.
How does this affect young children and the education they receive if this is a requirement in the schools they attend?
Well, I'm very thankful that a lot of pastors that are over these communities are starting to engage themselves in this public debate, because when you think about the people that are trapped in the worst of schools, this is where this particular type of messaging is going to hit hardest, in particular if the Obama administration decides that they really are not going to fund these areas.
So what do you see as the long-term effect of something like this on the nation, on American society?
I'm hoping that the church realigns itself and we begin to get our children out of these government cesspools that we call schools. This is a window of opportunity for people to re-engage in the education of their children and do what the scripture says, which is to train them up in the way they should go. We build their moral framework. This is a real place for us to start arguing again for vouchers and for other school options.
That's part of the mission of CURE, is it not?
It's our mission, but it's also the mission of the Catholic Church, to educate children so that they have a deep moral understanding of what choice is about. Choice loses its meaning if it doesn't matter what you choose.
Star Parker with CURE, Center for Urban Renewal and Education. It's always good to see you, Star.
It's good
Thank
to see you too. Thank you.
Coming up, a glimmer of hope for the missing Nigerian schoolgirls. One of the victims emerges from the jungle. And an amazing story dating back to Christopher Columbus, how this letter made its own incredible journey. Today we celebrate St. John Paul II's birthday. The Polish Pope was born Karol Wojtyła on May 18, 1920. St. John Paul II, pray for us. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Family members say one of the missing Nigerian schoolgirls has been found alive. The girl's uncle says she is traumatized and is now pregnant. She's one of more than 200 girls kidnapped by Boko Haram militants from a school in Nigeria more than 2 years ago. That mass abduction generated worldwide attention, but most of the girls remain missing. The girl will be reunited with her mother. Her father died while she was in captivity. Russia is criticized for building a military base over an archaeological site in Syria. The American School of Oriental Research reveals satellite imagery of the UNESCO World Heritage Site in Palmyra, first damaged by ISIS. Researchers were optimistic the damage would stop when ISIS was forced out of the area. What they didn't anticipate was the Russians moving into that historic site.
It's a major challenge. I often describe it as the worst cultural heritage crisis since World War II. What we've seen in northern Iraq and Syria, it's extremely hard to put in words.
A UNESCO official says the Russian encampment may violate international treaties protecting historic zones. To ignore the poor is to despise God. That's the Holy Father's tough lesson today. At his Wednesday teaching in St. Peter's Square, Pope Francis focused on the gospel parable of Lazarus and the rich man. He reminds us of God's final judgment for Christians who ignore the poor. God's mercy for us, he says, is linked to our mercy for our neighbor. If I don't open the doors to my heart to the poor, that door stays closed for God too. Alan Holdren, Rome Bureau Chief for EWTN's Catholic News Agency, is joining us. Alan, the Holy Father remembered St. John Paul II on his birthday. What did he say about his predecessor?
Well, today would have been John Paul II's 96th birthday. The Pope remembered him. He also remembered the President of Poland, who's here in Italy at the moment, and actually was here celebrating Mass last Friday for John Paul II's anniversary of him being shot here in St. Peter's Square. Consider this interesting fact, Brian, that John Paul II, between being a student here and his papacy, would have spent more than a third of his birthdays here in Rome.
Interesting. And also, can you describe the Pope's special greeting for Ukrainian pilgrims?
There was a group of Ukrainian orphans and displaced children. They're here promoting peace. Pope Francis prayed that future generations, new generations of Ukrainians could enjoy peace. They've, of course, been in this conflict that's left 1 in 4 children in Ukraine as displaced persons.
And finally, tell us about the Pope greeting a St. Bernard.
That's right. Magnum was his name. Huge dog. He was in St. Peter's Square as part of a delegation that's promoting a hospice, a Catholic hospice in the Alps that used to help people as they crossed between Italy and Switzerland. They want to promote this hospice as a World Heritage Site of UNESCO. We'll see if this actually helps.
Alan Holdren joining us from Rome. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Brian.
And the U.S. returns to Italy a letter written by Christopher Columbus in 1493 announcing his discovery of the New World. Columbus sent that letter to Spain's King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. In it, he marvels at the fertile islands and the timid natives who he believed were ripe for conquest by Spain and conversion to Christianity. The letter was stolen from a library in Florence and replaced with a forgery. The original was eventually acquired by the Library of Congress unwittingly. But art historians in the U.S. examined the two versions and confirmed the fraud.
We used an expert witness out of Princeton University as well as experts from the Smithsonian, and we determined that indeed the version at the Library of Congress was the original version that belonged to Italy and should be in the Ricardiano Library in Florence.
The original and the fraud were on display at Rome's Angelica Library today. Up next, underwater discovery, Egyptian artifacts rise to the surface, and protecting religious freedom. The sponsor of a new bill explains its importance. We thank God for Wednesday and for each of you. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. A bill passed by the House aims to put international religious freedom at the center of U.S. security and diplomatic decision-making. If it becomes law, the Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom would report directly to the Secretary of State. News Nightly's Jason Calvi asked the bill's lead sponsor why that's important.
The State Department is very, very much compartmentalized. This person talks to that, it never gets up, it's stovepiped. This ensures that actionable information about religious persecution, prisoners of conscience will, hopefully, if you have the right person as Ambassador at Large, will be the chief advisor to the Secretary of State on these vital issues of religious persecution.
This act also requires the president to appoint somebody to the National Security Council to talk about religious freedom. Why is that important as well?
Well, it's important that this be a whole-of-government approach, that religious freedom should not be shunted to the side, which it often is. And sadly, the Obama administration has so trivialized for most of its time in office. But it also will lead to the promulgation of a list of designated persons so that we know who is doing the torturing. It'll be hopefully an engraved invitation to people who have been maltreated to come forward with names, places, so that we can take actionable information, actions against them, including visa denial.
Or if this becomes law, the State Department will have something called the Religious Freedom Defense Fund. What will that do to help people and other people that are persecuted?
The funding will help them, particularly in countries where there is even some semblance of a judicial process, like in Vietnam, where Christians are routinely brought to prison, but a defense fund will provide the necessary funding to help defense attorneys, defense lawyers, even in countries that are dictatorships but have some kind of legal system, to mount a credible defense of the accused religious believer or the human rights defender who's there for defending religious believers.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Representative Smith, for your time.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason. And Speaker of the House Paul Ryan appoints a friend of EWTN to the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. Cristina Arriaga, Executive Director of the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty, succeeds Dr. Robert George of Princeton University. He's completed 2 terms on that commission. The commission is an independent body making policy recommendations to the President, Secretary of State, and Congress. Cristina Arriaga says her late father would be very proud to know that she'll be defending the same right stripped from him in his native Cuba. A new report analyzing global abortion trends finds abortion rates in the developed world have dropped to an all-time low. A joint study by the pro-abortion research group, the Guttmacher Institute, and the World Health Organization finds abortion rates dropped from 46 per 1,000 women to 27 per 1,000 in a 14-year period. Rates remain virtually unchanged in developing countries. The study also finds the world's highest abortion rates are in the Caribbean and the lowest are in North America. Arina Grossu is director of the Center for Human Dignity at the Family Research Council. This sounds like good news, is it?
It sounds like good news if we could trust the data, but the truth of the matter is that no one in the world has the data on abortions because 60 countries, it's still illegal for abortions to be performed. So it's underperforming, reporting of abortion. And so we really can't trust this data. And really, we have to see what is that Guttmacher is trying to do. And what Guttmacher is trying to do is to show that developing countries that have contraception and abortion have lower rates because they're pushing for that.
So the statistics are twisted in their favor. That's what they're concluding from this?
The statistics are twisted. The organizations involved have a media bias because it's Guttmacher, it's the UN Population Fund, it's the World Health Organization that's involved. And so they have a bias, and what they're trying to go for is to show that abortion rate is going to go down if we continue to have contraceptives and abortions, and that's what they're pushing.
So are pro-life laws having any impact? Are they cutting the rate of abortion?
Of course, and in countries where abortion is legal, abortions are lower. That's just basic fact. And also in terms of what some of the studies have shown is that in countries where abortion laws, pro-life laws have been put into place, abortion has been cut by 25%. And so we see that whenever laws are put into place to protect life, it drops the abortion rate.
So tell us about the abortion rate in Western Europe and how that is so significant.
Sure. So in the study, if we're going to assume the numbers in the study, it actually shows that in Western Europe, it's a 38% rise in abortions, even though Western Europe has contraceptives. So it actually defeats what they're trying to do. What we need to say is we need to have basic health care in these countries, not go after South America and Africa, and provide basic health care, food, clean water. Let's not push for contraceptives and abortions to try to say that abortion rates will lower once those things are in place.
So we as pro-life people, what's the bottom line for us with this?
The bottom line is this study is pushing an agenda, and the agenda is pushing is to have contraceptives and legalize abortions and attacking the 2 continents that are still very pro-life.
That's very important to know. Arina Grossu, thanks for joining us.
You.
Well, submerged treasures are now on display for everyone to see. A statue found in an ancient Egyptian seaport has been restored and placed on display at London's British Museum. It was discovered in the Mediterranean Sea, where a European team used innovative techniques to find 2 lost cities. Many artifacts are well preserved because of their underwater setting. More than 200 finds are now on display at the British Museum, including statues and gold jewelry. Until tomorrow, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. We close tonight with pictures from St. Peter's Square today as Pope Francis greets tens of thousands who came to see and hear the Holy Father. Good night and God bless you.